cursor right on it.
Oh, perfect.
So you guys are live.
Okay. You good?
Take it away.
Okay. So, Brianna, you also said you were like, wait, we already did this. What are we doing? So let's frame this a little bit for you guys so you understand like why you are here and what we're doing. Okay. So if we back up a ways and you think about this idea that we've been doing walkthroughs for with the IPG tool, right? And out of those walkthroughs, we identified that this is sort of our next area of growth or focus, this evidence-based collaboration, both providing the opportunities as teachers and then seeing in students that they are building on one another's insights using evidence. So that's what 3E is. And that's what we were looking for, is both of these pieces out of this. So here's how this came about. This was identified as a focus area. We worked on protocols and TPTs. Remember last time we were in the library? You guys were in here last time we did that. And then Justine said to me like, okay, what would be the next step? What would we do next? And I said, well, typically we would go on to conversation cues, but to be honest with you, that's usually in year 2 of implementation, and you guys are in the end of February of year 1, right? And she said, well, if that's the next step, like let's go for it, right? Wow. So I want you to know that you're a little bit ahead of the curve. Okay, so this is you're getting this information hot off the press and early. So we are extending the thinking behind evidence-based collaboration to look at conversation cues and how they support that. Okay, and you started a lot of this work with Justine on the 15th, which Brianna was remembering, and that day this was kind of the title of that. I mean, I think it specifically says evidence-based collaboration, but then I know Justine had talked a lot about this piece of shifting the cognitive load with you from teacher to student, and this was the guiding question. How do we get out of the way as teachers to support students in building on each other's ideas using evidence? So will you guys just have a conversation so that 2 things. One, both just to activate your background knowledge and remember, like, what did we do on the 15th? And also it helps me to just hear what you remember and kind of voice over. So you just have a conversation with each other and about what you remember, if anything. And it's okay.
Some of what we did is looked at protocols that would help with that.
Okay.
That involve kids getting out, talking to each other, getting a chance to think about things, just the various, we practiced some of them ourselves.
And to add on to that, identifying the protocols that actually do that. Because
Yeah,
some of them are better than others.
Right.
In shifting that load. And for us being able to know, okay, I can get out of the way for that. So we did like identifying that. Like practicing some so that we know how to do it.
We just added to our little bank cards.
Yeah, to your TPT ring. Okay.
We looked at the data and celebrated kind of like, what do we see when that make us think? And I think all of us had the same thing of like, it wasn't, because she introduced it as like, what are your worries? And so I think all of us were like, there's not really a worry, it's like an awareness. And then kind of a celebration that we're not where we were.
Yes, that you've grown.
Yeah, there's progress.
Yes. Good, remembering. You looked at data, and then did you also watch a video, I think, and do some talk flow?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, yeah. Well, she talked about, we did watch a little thing with a kindergarten teacher talking about, and then we actually talked more about what she could have done instead of it being
what not to do.
Yeah, okay.
And then she showed us a page that had different types of talk flow. The teacher, student, teacher, student, teacher, student, or teacher, student, 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 or there were various teacher, student,
yes.
student, and the different possible ones, or not all of them, but several that could be
Could be, okay, great. Do you remember?
Just comparing it, yeah. And
Yeah.
it was really eye-opening to see, teacher, student, and then you see teacher, student, and it was like, wow.
Yeah.
I wanna
Okay,
get to that
great,
point.
exactly. So that's part of our goal, and today is in support of that idea, right? How do we hand it over to kids so that there's much more of that student talk and much less of our talk as adults in that? We're just kind of the support, we're the guide along the way. We're not the one that's in charge of that conversation flow. So great remembering, that's exactly connected to what we're doing today. So like I said, the next step of that is looking specifically at conversation cues and how that supports student talk and takes us hopefully out of the picture a little bit, okay? I just want to name something else for you that came up in other conversations with K1 and 4-5 so that you're getting like the same messaging from me, which is they had all asked some questions around the walkthrough data. And their questions were this. So the walkthrough data really shows, and this is a huge celebration, that you guys as teachers are providing opportunities for students to have these conversations, right? What we're not seeing as much of is kids being able to build on each other's insights using the evidence piece, right? So a lot of opportunities provided. That's a huge recognition. I was saying earlier, like you get points for that, although it's not really a point, but that is really, really important. And then our next step is we also want it to be handed over to the kids so that they can build on each other within that conversation. So the question that came up around this was, what happens when the walkthrough, when you come into my room and it's a part of the lesson that may not lend itself specifically, right?
Like
to
a test.
kids. Exactly, totally. And so is the data skewed in that way? Because it's this snapshot of this time that we walked in and we just may not have had the opportunity to see this. And so here's my message that I want you to hear, which is a couple things. First of all, just so that you know, when you are starting with this curriculum, we are not really expecting to go in and see a ton of evidence around this core action 3, because we're looking for core action 1, which is, are you using the texts that are in the module? Are kids engaging with them? Do they have access to that text? And then what kind of questions are being asked and how are they sequenced out of that? So some of the teachers, especially in 4-5, were saying like, well, our baseline data is really low, the data from the beginning of the year around 3E. And of course it is. Like we wouldn't expect to go in and see a ton of work happening around core action 3 when you're just getting to know what's in these modules. The other piece of this is they are exactly right, and it's specifically true. Like we may not see kids in this big, deep conversation every time we go into a room based on all kinds of different factors, but there's still things we can glean even when they're doing a test. We can still see what evidence is there in there that kids have done some collaboration around evidence that's then showing up in their assessment situation. Gotcha. And what kinds of questions, like how are they entering into the task sometimes, can also show us like what is their background knowledge? Have they had the opportunity to think or talk about this with their peers before coming into the situation that you see right now? So it's true. And there's also instances where you go in a classroom and it's the opening of the lesson and it's much more teacher talk heavy, right? And then you might go into a room where it's only a science talk. And I was just saying I was at Dutch Creek a couple weeks ago and the 5th graders were doing, it was a text-based discussion and the kids were literally just talking the entire time. The teacher never said one word in the 20 minutes that we were in there. So that's kind of skewing the data in the other way, right? So knowing that there's this balance of that too. So just thinking about that piece of knowing the walkthrough data is a snapshot and it's one way to inform where we're going, right? Did you have a question
have
from
a
that,
question.
Lori? Yeah.
Well, I just have a question about the wording.
Yes.
Because my friends are often using evidence out of their text, but when you say building on someone else's, sometimes they'll say the other kid's name, because we kind of taught them how to do that, but they're like, John, I see that, and then but their next comment really isn't building on that one, it's just in addition to. How do you count that? I mean, do you count that as,
Good question.
you know, is
So
that
that's
building,
a great.
or is it, what do you actually mean for that? I'm talking about this and I'm like, oh, well, now I see that because of this. Do they have to clue in like that, or?
Good question. So when we're talking about this, like you're getting points or what?
Right, I want the good points.
I know, you're like, I want to get. So you're getting points for this, for providing the opportunities. You are getting points for students using evidence.
Okay, because they're good at that.
Okay, well, and I should even back up. You're getting points for them just having some kind of conversation, not even with evidence or building on, just like a conversation, right? And then you're getting more points if they're using evidence. And then kind of the ultimate goal is that they're using the evidence and yes, they are building on to one another. Yeah, so that the conversation isn't just flat, right? Which we know, but that they're getting to some kind of deeper thinking through that conversation. And the work we do today will hopefully give you some insight into like, okay, if this is a challenge I'm facing, that yeah, they're providing evidence, they can do that part, but there's no building on. Let's talk about some ways of like
to their part.
Totally, or just restate. Sometimes we see the same thing, right? So, great question. So ideally they're building on, and let's talk about some ways that they can do that. Sound good? Okay. So here's what this time will look like. We have like 90 minutes or a little less. I also want to be conscientious of you guys knowing like the end of the school day. So you might have bus duty or going back to, what do you call it? Stack and pack or whatever. So just thinking about, oh yeah, okay. So I'm conscientious of time, but just between now and the end of our time together, you are, yeah. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I'm like.
We are going to do some learning together, and then I'm going to give you a little time to actually apply, hopefully, what we've learned, so that you can take what you learned today out of here and do something with it. Sound good? Okay. All right. So I'm going to ask you guys to start, even while you're waiting for Brianna, and I'll fill her in. Here's your job. In here, you are going to see sentence strips of conversation cues. And I'm going to ask you, this is kind of like your hook or your grapple, you can think about it that way, to organize these in order from least cognitive and linguistic demand to most. Okay? All right.
Ooh, there's a lot in here. And I don't have my glasses
Oh
on.
no,
Okay,
you might
well,
need Jamie to help you.
I'll just be doing this.
Okay.
You know, like trying to put it, I can read them, it's how. Oh my goodness.
So it's the one with the dot. Is that the?
So,
or is it both sides?
the only thing the dot means is that they go in this pink and it's just an organization thing.
Okay, so that's smart.
Oh,
Wow.
yes.
Okay.
I know.
Okay, we don't have anything to compare, we don't have anything to compare with yet.
I know.
All right. Yeah, let's get the short ones.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
So do you, well, I would say.
Brianna, they are organizing these conversation cues from least cognitive and linguistic demand to most. So putting them in sort of some way.
Clarifying what the sounds,
Right. Right, I think, yeah, I think on the lesser side. Let's do short ones first. explain why they came up with it, because we have to think about why.
Is that more?
Yeah, I think that's so definitely. We can add to what your classmate said. More than that, but they don't have to necessarily not explaining,
I think that's
but
the
they're,
next step, like in between.
because this one's almost like it though. So, like, can you say more about that? Can you give an example? So. I don't know.
Maybe it's
This is too hard for her. I wanna go home. Okay, so.
Perseverance.
I know, I have a couple who's stamina, but stamina is lost it.
Stamina.
Oh. Why do you think that? What makes you think so? So that's evidence, and why do you think that? Yeah. So, yes, I'm there.
Let's just read the titles.
Oh. Dum, dum, dum. I don't need to read the rest.
No, it's good to read them.
What's your
but-
classmates,
Yes.
intelligence measurements in their own words, that's, yeah. we're there. I'll give you time to think and write your sketch or give it. Well. Go again exactly, least cognitive, I don't think that's the least cognitive, but it's. Yeah, no.
I feel like it goes in the least. Because I feel like they wait.
They wait until somebody else talks?
Conversation.
Oh, mine do not, mine are.
I have so many that start it and people wait for them.
Challenge thinking. What if, because that's the one that we said, what if it was different? Yeah, I think that's if it was different. Is this metacognition and to think about the thinking, so therefore it's hard? I think we're cheating. So you wanted them all across the table.
You-
now, right?
You can organize it any way you want, but I'm gonna ask you to like, well, here's my next
Maybe
question.
organize
If-
the columns.
Yeah, so within columns and then, like, I'm assuming you think these are the least and maybe this would be the next. And if you do place, does that make sense? So that there's some, well, ideally one long, either one
Like a long
long
row.
column or
Yeah,
one
so she wants- yeah,
long row
so
that
she wants to
shows,
answer it, yes.
exactly.
Right. So repeating,
Taxonomy.
or.
Yeah, I think,
I don't know, do we think it's paraphrase, because paraphrasing is different than just repeating. So I have a question.
mm-mm.
I don't know, we had this one.
I feel.
Oh, yeah, say what you say.
Yeah,
Come on.
I feel like clarifying is a little bit trickier than repeating it.
Well,
know.
I don't know, because we're
Because they're
saying,
not
so do you
making it
mean
up.
they don't know
They're just
necessarily?
hearing and then
Right.
they're
Right.
repeating or paraphrasing what somebody else said. So wouldn't this be
But,
easier?
so is this a child saying, so do you mean, this is me saying? So do you
oh,
mean?
good question. This is kids,
Oh, this is
kiddos.
kids, so
Yeah.
that is different then. Cause I was thinking
They
this
really have
was
to think
us, me
about-
saying, so do you mean, and then responding.
Ah,
Do you, like,
Good
Cause like sometimes
clarifying.
when we're clarifying with them, so, because we do that a lot, it asks us to say, so do you
Totally
mean, and
in
just.
this way.
Oh.
Yes. So this
To
is
hear somebody else's response and understand it, like interpret it to the class.
Right.
Is kind of what
So
I
I was thinking
saying.
this was the teacher part.
Right,
So, but
so-
that's a different thing, it's the kids saying.
these
so do
are
you
all think
So those
about
are
this
both
all
the
student
some-
So do you
based
think,
conversation.
though, that- Okay, so a student just said something, somebody's repeating it back. Would the next kind of step would be who can add on to it? Or do we need to clarify first?
I think, well, they clarify.
Well, you have to clarify yes to
Before
be able
the-
to add on.
Right, I think so.
I think.
I mean, that seems-
guessing
Yeah, I
ourselves.
know. It's-
Yeah.
I think you're thinking too.
And I don't think she's gonna dock our pay if we.
No, I.
You can add on to it and elaborate.
Wait,
more
wait,
about
we're
that.
getting scored on this?
No, yeah, yeah. Hold on.
Collaborators.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you can add, isn't that the same, I mean, these are very similar. Can you say more about that? Can you give an example? So I guess that giving an example might be a little bit more than this.
Well, but if they're clarifying it, and then, I don't
Give
know
an
if it's the
example.
same student, they're elaborating and giving an example, you know, like, so did you mean, or yes, and give an example, or
Mhm.
no.
Right,
this
then
is
they
what
have
I
to
mean.
respond.
I don't know, what do you think?
Over there. We still don't know about the time to think. I mean, it's hard because you don't know what's going on in their head. I mean, you know, like some of them may be very much engaging into it, coming up with some deep things that they're gonna say. Well, because they're not having to, I mean, but they have to, I don't know.
So are
I
you,
feel like,
is this the
okay, so
initial
I'm just
thing?
going off of like my experience with the curriculum, and when I say this line,
Mhm.
give you time to. They're not very deep questions.
and how much of a linguistic demand is that asking of them?
Well, if they're writing, depends if they're writing their sketch.
For some kids, the writing might be a little bit more, right? What about if
So
they're
they
just
put their ideas and
sketching?
thoughts. Yeah, see, that's the other thing, like they're just, because with our Peter Pan stuff, I mean, my kids are, like, after every chapter, they had a chance to write, they, you know, and then some kids who just draw, yeah, they're not thinking, you know, they're just, well, I mean, they're thinking, but then there were kids who were asking, like, why in the world would he do that to poor Wendy? And they were, I mean, so I guess it depends on the kid, but,
So what I was.
because there's nobody else talking,
That's why I
just
feel like
me,
this one
just
doesn't
me.
ask too much evidence of their.
Mm.
I
So
don't
you
know,
have,
just-
I guess, and I was looking at it kind of as a process going down, like you've got to
Well,
give
we
them
do start,
something
yeah,
first.
we do start with that,
And
yes.
then who can repeat what they said after they've had this time.
But I also know that some kids are waiting for this. They aren't, I mean, some kids aren't doing this, but other kids, you know, they spent most of their effort here and now they're listening to the other kids, but some kids are waiting to hear what other kids say.
Uh-huh,
So, I
to
mean,
be
it
able
depends
to-
on
Okay.
the situation.
Yes, keep that in mind, that situational piece, we can come back to that.
Well, now, this might be a little different.
Right.
I mean, we might end up changing, you know, originally we thought these were the least and this was the most, but now that we have to integrate, I'm just kind of thinking some of these sentences,
Why you're
maybe we
right.
need to work it in a little bit
Why do
more.
you think that goes somewhere?
Maybe clarifying. That's, these two are
And we can
the
explain
same.
add on to what your classmate said, we can explain why your classmate came.
Yeah.
Those two.
Because that's
I like
the-
to use
This is now
together.
looking for the evidence for why they said that.
I feel like
Different or
we're still
same
somewhere in
from what
here.
they said. Well, especially when the two kids have said something, so when they,
So somebody said something, somebody
Actually-
added on to it.
and then how are
does
they
that
different?
compare? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that one.
Does that go there?
Over there,
In between.
between those two.
That's
Well,
kind
this
of
is the end, that's the conclusion, that's the closing, that's them deciding how it went.
So with the challenge thinking. then-
Yep, yours was right there.
Good. Okay, are you happy?
Looking for
Provide
evidence
before
evidence.
this one,
Yeah, like somewhere in.
so then you're asking to compare, how does it change? Because somebody has, can you say more about that? You can explain, and then they can add on after they explain what they're. Is that what you're thinking?
Yes, all of these things are happening at the same time.
I'm feeling like.
In the 10 minutes I'm supposed to have this discussion. Well, give them 10 minutes.
Oh,
Good? Okay.
Sure.
Remember that it's mostly just to get you thinking about this exactly in the way you just did, okay? So we'll just leave them here and you can have a look. And I'm going to give you an anchor text. This is actually from the first module's teacher guide. You might recognize it, or you might have been like, wow, I had 800 other things going on when I was looking at that teacher
I
guide.
don't
And
think
so,
I read it, so module 2.
yeah, which is
And I was
okay.
like, what the heck are conversation cues?
Yes,
Why does
there
it
you
keep
go.
saying that?
Okay, so here's the overview of the conversation cues. In this small packet, there is, these conversation cues are organized in a way. So if you wanna go there first, you can go first and like see what the thinking is behind this order. And then I'm going to ask you to read these first 2 pages. And as you read, just code or underline in any way that you want to. But when you are done, we're gonna have a conversation about what was new learning from reading and looking at this. And then how do conversation cues promote an equitable classroom? Okay, and this is thinking from K1, 4, 5, and then we'll probably get out another chart and add our thinking as well. Okay, any questions about this part of it? No? All right.
I'll go back and
You're
see how we did.
I know, yeah.
So you're gonna go there first?
Oh, because
I wanna see their reasoning first.
Yeah, definitely.
Ooh.
No noises.
Well, yeah, we had different
Well, I
ideas.
moved your stuff so I could
Oh,
do there. Okay. These are myself.
Bless You know, that's scary too.
Sorry. Scan likely.
Are you good? Did you get a chance to read? Okay. What was either new learning or affirming of what you already knew about conversation cues?
I don't know, because of everything being so new, I don't think I've ever really taken the time to really see how they are actually building on one another, starting with the student and then going to other students and then deepening that thinking. And I really don't think that I've taken that time to really like soak that in. I mean, I think we've done just, let's get to the next lesson.
Right. What's next? Totally.
And,
Yes.
to have it laid out here,
Uh-huh.
just makes it a lot more clear, I guess.
Yes.
And like, whoa, I haven't you been doing it the whole time, kind of, to myself a little bit. However, this is new learning, so it's okay.
Exactly, definitely. And if you notice, did you see next to these top rows where it says, so for instance, in the first goal, these were introduced in Module 1, Unit 1, right? And then Module 1, Unit 3, Module 2, Unit 2. But these goal 4 conversation cues, that's just Module 3, Unit 1,
That's
right?
why didn't you
So-
hear me say when we were organizing those, I was like, oh, these 2 are my new favorite to add on and who can explain why? It's because we're in Module 3 and we introduced those.
Yeah,
Those
exactly.
are always my go-tos. I didn't even
Right.
go
So
back to the.
So knowing that they build over time, and this is true across all grade levels, right? So this is the same progression or rollout in K as it is in fifth. So second and third, really similar. But yeah, Jamie, I also understand and hear that piece of just seeing it. I'm very, very much like analytical, and I love documents like this where I can see how it all fits, right? All those pieces. So, okay. We were also talking about earlier that, you know, they don't have to necessarily completely go in a linear order, but if you haven't done much of like the goal 1 or goal 2 part, then it's going to be really hard to get to goal 3 or goal 4. So they do build in that way, but you know, Dave was saying, and actually Courtney as well, it can depend on what are you asking students to do? What kind of deeper thinking are you trying to get at? Or what is your purpose in this part of the lesson? So knowing that in some ways there's some flexibility within those goals too. So
I think.
what else? Yeah.
For me, new learning is that you said these are all what students are saying. So for me, I'm good about using add-on and explain, but it's me posing that question. They're not doing that. So really it should be a student who said something and is like, who can, and then another student is like, well, who can add on to that? Is that my understanding?
That is the ideal, right? But we know that we also have to model that for students first, right? So we do this modeling part first, and then ideally, especially as we build towards, you know, I think about this kind of as a progression. So in kindergarten, they're providing the opportunities and they're hoping that students are collaborating. May not be a ton of building amongst 5-year-olds, especially not in the beginning of the year, right? But then as we build to 5th grade, I was just telling you that example of me walking into a classroom in 20 minutes, the teacher never said anything and the students were very much just building on and collaborating completely through that conversation using evidence. So definitely we model and we approximate and we experiment with the idea that the goal would be that, yeah, kids, maybe not all of them, you know, especially in 2nd grade, but that they can start building on, like Lori was saying, how do I get them to build on to each other? So yeah, you stepping out of the way and asking them to take on more of those conversation cues themselves. So yeah. What else?
Oh, and I don't know, I mean,
Uh-huh.
if this is a noticing, I'm just thinking
Yeah.
about how I have some of my conversation charts. And I kind of look at this and go, oh, I think I want to redo my, conversation or sentence starters a little bit more. I mean, we have some that were modeled, in that first module.
Yes.
I only remember the ones from first module.
Well, there was a few
Make the
because
chart.
for unit, as we get into unit 3, there are some kind of additions, so I remade it again, kind of. But now that I see this, it's like, oh, I don't have to kind of stop where it's modeled in the module. Maybe take this and go ahead and not wait, but go ahead and introduce them.
Yes,
I mean, why not?
Sure, definitely.
So.
Yeah.
Well, and that's where I'm like, okay, I didn't make a chart. I haven't made one since the first module, and we had just the 3 at the beginning. So now I'm like, well, maybe I just make one to have up all the time.
Yeah,
So that
they
know
can refer
what
back
the
to
sentence
it.
stem is.
Yeah.
Because we
How it's
know,
supposed to look and sound.
because we know some kids, who, take a little bit more time to speak, maybe they would be up here, but we know those other ones that are great talkers, I mean, they may be ready for some of these other more deeper,
Yes.
sentence starters or,
Yeah.
so
Right.
that would definitely help them and meet all those needs wherever,
Yeah, you're right. Some kids will go there automatically, right? If you have them up or on display completely.
yeah.
And I also remember, Brianna, I think I remember you saying when we were working on the TPTs and protocol piece, you were saying like, oh, I do a lot of these things in math. I just never thought that, it can also, so this interdisciplinary piece completely, which 4 and 5 we're touching on. So also thinking about if they're up and in the room for kids to use, when are other times of the day that they could be entering into those same conversations using those cues, right? So, and sometimes even both in content areas, but also just really low leverage, like when you're having your morning meeting or that conversation around other things and letting them practice with the conversation cues in that setting so that they can then apply them to the content later on. So, yeah.
I mean, and that would probably be a good time to practice too. In a morning meeting, you could throw out, I'm thinking about your little cute little facts that you write on the board, an animal fact or whatever. And what a great kind of morning meeting where you throw that out there and step back. And it, it doesn't have to be necessarily related to the module, but just kind of getting that conversation going. Getting them, I know that's what I'm thinking of. You could throw out anything that they might be interested in.
Well, and that list of questions that Liz sent us, and that are in the,
I saw that
they were-
hanging on their board
they're
yesterday.
they're actually pretty, I mean, I've done several with my group, just as a crew thing, and some of the questions are really quite interesting. And the ideas, I mean, they have very different ideas, so that would very much fit into, some of the deeper not agree, I disagree, I agree. So one of the questions was, do you think it's harder to be a kid or an adult? And I would say about half picked one and half picked the other, and I said, and then talked about why. And we didn't do it more as a discussion, it was more of everybody just was sharing.
Yes.
But that could easily been that situation where they just, well, I disagree because I don't think, because at least adults get paid for all that, like that kind of thing.
Totally.
Because they felt pretty strongly about their choice. Whichever side they were on, and so that would have probably been great for this sort of situation where.
Totally, because it promotes a deep conversation, right? That they want to
And there's a
enter in
little
and talk about.
Dissonance in it, it builds a
Yes.
little, and they want to talk maybe a little.
Yes, yes,
Well, yeah,
yes.
because I was thinking like when you said that, and I'm like, okay, but how do we get them? Because this is really about using evidence,
Yes.
not just building on. So that's great practice, like
To
just
get 'em
thinking about my fact
Right.
of the day, and that would be great practice for using the verbiage.
Mhm.
But then maybe go into the questions like that where they
There's
had
a
to have
variety
some
of-
kind of evidence of why they thought that, you know.
But that's
and
your
explain
segue
it.
into it. Remember this morning when we talked about this, and now we're gonna use the same idea, but now you're going to look into the text to prove
Yes.
your idea.
Mm.
So you're still making all that connection, which.
And making that connection between when I say that as an adult, I would get right. I think it's easier to be an adult because you actually get paid for all the effort you put in. And I know my parents, are working. My mom is right.
It's life evidence.
That is
versus,
right. So helping them make that connection, like here's my exactly evidence from life, from conversation or what I know from my experience versus then, okay, and we're going to use textual evidence. And here's our resource that we are referring to. So helping make that connection too.
Because this evidence is not necessarily just the text evidence in relation to module either, right? It can be.
Depending what the topic is and what the conversation is, right? I was saying, by the
lessons, that
time,
is the goal.
totally, if that's the goal, and especially by the time kids are in 4th and 5th grade, they should be using a resource to provide strong textual evidence. And, they're being asked standards-wise to quote from the text in order to provide that evidence. And there's some of that happening in 3rd grade and an approximation in 2nd grade as well, but helping them to understand that this conversation is grounded in this text or this resource versus we're gonna think about just our experience in life and what we bring to that for evidence. So
Well, and this is just a side note, with
Yeah.
that evidence, the day that we always do the engagement text.
yes.
And all those comprehension questions, that is something that I make them do. Now you have to really listen, because now when I ask a question, you have to find the evidence in the text. Even though if it's a simple answer, they have to find it, they have to read the sentence that confirms their thinking. So, that's what
That's
we're doing
perfect.
even for that. to get that
Exactly.
started,
Yes,
so.
yes. That's
It's fun.
exactly it. Right. Yeah. Pushing them to the text.
Well, and that was something last year before EL, but
Mhm.
just proving from the
No,
text. But
yeah.
now it's
Mhm.
just,
Yes.
that's really easy because it's sitting right in front of.
Well, no,
That's
I feel
on
like
the
I'm doing it, but I'm not like the next Tuesday, I'm gonna be like, okay, can you come up to the board and show me the sentence that said that? Like that's-
Perfect.
I'll add that in because I like that, and I haven't been doing that. I've been accepting their answers.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Prove
That's
it.
the
Right.
next-
Exactly.
Yeah.
Prove it. How do you know that? Where did you see that in the text?
And they'll giggle about it because of that, and
Yeah.
they know when they answer, I'm going to say, prove it. So I'll go, prove it. And they smile and giggle and then they're looking for that.
Totally.
So that's kind of fun.
I love when I'm in a classroom and kids are having a discussion and I hear one of them say to the other, can you show me where your evidence for that thought is? Or
Wow.
can you provide evidence, and that definitely when I was in that 5th grade room.
Well, and last week,
Yes.
last week, when, in module, or unit 2, end of unit 2, their assessment was a fishbowl of where they we went over all the discussion norms, and they'd already pre-planned, they already had their notes, so they could bring those kind of with them, but they could speak from them, but they couldn't read them, about their evidence about whether or not they would recommend or not recommend Peter Pan. And they had to have their evidence, and a lot of them, I was actually going somewhere with this, and I totally lost it. And then they were saying, okay, now I can remember. They were like, so you said it was like one of the little girls said it's, like the pirates don't act like real pirates do. And one of the kids said, so you said that pirates, the pirates knew, like, but they were fighting with sword. Well, so where did they? And so they didn't say evidence, but they said, where did they act in a way that a pirate didn't act? And she's like, well, they said, do you want a snack before you have to walk the plank because I don't want you to be hungry. They wouldn't really do that. And so they were having this they were doing really great.
Yes.
And they had prepped, I already, they knew what the checklist said on it. I was gonna be looking for these things. So some kids were, more for the grade than maybe for the discussion. But they did ask them, well, what do you mean by that? And where did they, and they had to pull it from their notes. And then some of them didn't have very good evidence. And so the kids were like, and they were like, well,
right.
Called them out a little.
Yeah.
But it wasn't me, it was each other.
Exactly.
I was just
In that
observing. And then the
situation.
kids on the outside were also writing notes about what was going on inside what the discussion, what was going on in the discussion, thoughts they were having about what they were talking about. And then the day before that, they were actually giving feedback about who was following the discussion rooms and who wasn't following the discussion rooms.
Oh, great. Yeah, so know that that's
So
also
that's
where
coming.
they're going, and then that connects to fourth and
and
fifth. It just builds
figured.
on. Yeah.
That some of the
That
kids
piece.
that we were hoping at least that, because like some of the kids really were, they knew what they were going
Yes.
to do, and they were like ticking off, I'm sure in their heads, did I ask enough questions? But I think the kids that were, this was a little new for,
Yes.
we knew that they'd be, like maybe they're not mastering it here,
Yeah.
but they're gonna get more
Exactly,
opportunities
yes.
to get later. Because they're not all gonna be able to, that conversation's not gonna be 100% kids all doing that same thing.
Not right now. And knowing that it builds, right? So think about it starting in kindergarten, and by the time you're in third grade, what that would look like, as opposed to this is their first real opportunity or focus. I know you're doing some, you were saying, but it looks different, right?
Yeah.
So
Because they had to have it all the notes and everything, so they'd already pre-planned it.
yeah, perfect. That's exactly, that prepares for them as they continue. So what do you think about this piece of promoting equity? So how do conversation cues support equity? That's a big push with our curriculum writers, and one of our main focuses of this curriculum nationwide that we want to support.
Right, are you kind of talking like something you might use?
Well, more, I mean, how is it helping all students to have some voice or entry into this? Even though it might look different for different kids, right? And knowing that there's some sort of progression in these goals, but how are we allowing for multiple entry points, do you think?
Well, you're giving, for some, like you said, the slow starters that need that think time, that are not as ready to jump in, that gives them a chance, some of these gives them a chance to maybe not start the conversation, but add on to things or explain other people's thinking because maybe they weren't sure about their own thinking.
Yes.
So be able to rely on a little bit of somebody else, but then be able to put their own spin on it.
Totally. So there's some differentiation in that,
Yeah, I
right?
think
Is what
so,
you're
yeah.
saying based on where they're gonna enter in. So these different entry points, yeah, definitely.
And making sure they get a voice.
Yeah.
I mean, I noticed that, I did not tell them to do this, but when they were doing that last week, somebody kind of appointed themselves, like to make sure that everybody had a chance to speak. Like, Kaylee, you haven't talked yet.
Yes.
I didn't tell them that anybody was the leader, although from the facilitating, they've done
Yes,
before.
they know
They
that-
kind of know somebody needs to jump in sometimes if not everybody's participating. So, but somebody just decided to do that on their own and was like, so Kaylee, you haven't talked yet. What is your opinion of the book? Kind of thing. So it draws out maybe somebody who would feel like they, like they're being overlooked.
Yes, so kind of inviting that
Yeah.
others in piece. Yes, definitely. Dave was saying that as well, which is a great piece of providing equity. And then it's not always
It's not on
us as
me, yeah.
the
it's
teacher
somebody
to say,
else.
I haven't heard your voice.
It's
So,
actually even something I'm thinking now, just even in second grade, to maybe start small and have your small groups and appoint somebody. You could always take turns to make sure everybody, I mean, we're using the popsicle sticks right now,
Mhm.
you know, to do that, but even appointing somebody first and then maybe gradually stepping back and seeing if somebody could take that on.
Right.
Mhm.
Cause that'd make the facilitator thing a lot easier in third grade if they were already trained for that. Cause that's a big thing at the beginning is that, you know, how somebody is the facilitator, someone else is the timekeeper.
You're right.
But they're on their own doing things and they're working through their own problems. And then, the material that they're doing in a little group and somebody already is, I mean, that would, yeah, cause that takes a little while to get, you know, like, so there's usually a kid that's willing to do it and then they, you know, and then it's the rest of them.
Yes,
So
yes,
they're usually willing to, but if you started it now, it makes it easier for me.
Totally.
Go for it.
We were talking about with the fourth grade, so Courtney and Rachel were saying that sometimes there's challenges of inequitable conversation, right? Someone's talking a lot and so we were talking about the use of popsicle sticks. So you know that that's something that's supported in first and second grade, definitely. So you have you enter into the conversation. Right. We were talking about just how there's ways of controlling that as well. So if you have a child who's talking the whole time, maybe they only get 3 popsicle sticks for that conversation, right? So that, and then we were also talking about that piece of the facilitator or some way of who's going to begin or start the conversation. And I've seen some teachers just have a B on a few popsicle sticks for certain students. So if you have a B, I'd like you to try to be one of the people to begin the conversation today, and perhaps here's the sentence stem that you might use to do that, but a way of supporting. So thinking about, like, there's some supports in second grade that we then think, oh, kids may not need, but they still may need, especially as we are beginning this. So. All right, I'm gonna put you in student hat for a few minutes. And because there's 3 of you, it's going to look like this. I'm gonna facilitate, which literally means I'm gonna share the question with you and I'll watch the time as well. The question is a teacher related question, but I'm gonna ask you to try to have a conversation and use some of these conversation cues in the conversation, okay, as you go along. And is there something else I want to say? I don't think so. Oh, the other thing I was going to say is I'll tell you the question and then I'm going to give you a little bit of think time. So if you want to jot a couple notes or draw something or just sit and think, you'll have like a minute or 90 seconds or so to do that. Okay, here's your question. What are some of the challenges you've experienced when using conversation cues in the classroom? Or you might speak to what you were saying before, but I'm going to give you like 90 seconds of think time, and then I'll let you know when the conversation is open. All right, the conversation is open. You decide who would like to begin.
All right, so, well, I don't want to go to the hard part. And the first thing I thought of is I don't have time for these. Like, I mean, like I don't have time. It's not that I don't have time for any of them, but Because I have 5 minutes to go over the learning targets and to talk about what we're supposed to get, even in the learning targets, that there's a time about what do those words mean and what makes that makes you think of and sort of those things. And then I only have 15 minutes to the next part and the next part. I find I have to cut to be able to get things done in time. I have to cut the conversation short, and that's kind of against the whole reason of, so I have to figure out what do I cut. I want to have a really good in-depth conversation, but something else has to go. Like I can't have an in-depth conversation in 3 minutes. Like if the kids are building on each other, I don't know how to, that's a hard thing for me.
I said, so one of my, I have 2 that I wrote down. One is asking the kind of questions that lend themselves to conversation. And then kids not respecting the think time of others, because some are ready to talk and say everything, and other kids need more time to hear it, to really process it, and all of that kind of thing.
Well, I wanted to add on with what Lori said, because I agree. I think I look at that time and I look at this short, I mean, there's a place that it says conversation cue, but then you're trying to figure out, okay, I have 20 minutes to do this, and this, and that's that little part at the end. And we know our kids, that conversation is gonna be more than 2 or 3 minutes. Just getting into kind of a position to discuss. So I agree that kind of time issue does become a problem, and how do you choose what to kind of cut short so that you can have those deeper conversations.
I know,
Something's
I'm
down,
trying
I'm
to,
like,
I can't. That what you're saying is the same as what I'm saying when I talk about the kind of question. Because if there are those good questions that promote that kind of thinking, to get there and to provide that opportunity to add on, to explain another student's thinking. And I think about the times that I've done it and I've just let go of time and we're just be present in this moment and see where it takes us. But I think about the times that I've done that, and it does, you give them think time, you give them talk time, we share out, then I start posing these deeper questions. So that's like a lot of steps, a lot of thinking and processing that they've already done before we can get really to that conversation.
Well, and to kind of go back with the whole time thing too, I wrote that the teacher's always doing the asking, and because of the time issue, it's like, okay, blah, 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 blah. And you're not taking the time to really listen to too many kids. Like you might listen to 1 or 2, and we know there's many more that have an opinion, but you're looking at the clock and go, okay, well, I had a couple of answers, so I guess we're good there. And then you end up moving on. So, just that piece.
Well, I have a couple kiddos that have speech issues in my classroom. And so I have one fella who just repeats himself over and over again, but he's got amazing ideas. But to get that idea out, he has to repeat like a phrase or a sentence, like maybe 5 to 6 times. And it's hard because you want him to spit it out, but you know that you can't do, you can't, it's just how it works. You gotta let him, and then the kids get, impatient because they're, trying to, but the idea is always worth waiting for. But you can just feel the tension in the room. Just get it, just say it. And it's not that they're being mean either, but it's just hard to wait through. And then I have another couple of kids who it's really hard to be able to tell what they're saying. Like it's not, some of them it's because they're quiet. And even if you give them the, you have to run, if you run around with the microphone, it's still, that's an added element of complication, but like some that just don't speak clearly, they're working on the speech thing, and so it's, you know, again, it's trying to be patient for all that, for everybody to be able to say their piece, but, you know, it's also, the other kids are starting to get naughty because they, you know, they're distracted by, you know, the process because it took so long. So I don't know, I always find that there's a fine line of continuing on with the conversation and, okay, we do need to move on because everybody's drifted, you know, because they said their piece and they, you know, and I usually try to make sure that, you know, it's like, there's a reason, you know, you need to listen to everybody else because that's gonna come together, but, you know, short attention span theater sometimes. The speech comes out.
I agree with that, just telling people that don't want to speak out, have great ideas, do have things to say and are comfortable maybe with just an elbow partner or whatever, but not to the whole class. And then also while you were trying to listen and not think too hard, and so hopefully it's in my brain. Put it away.
Okay, I'm gonna pause
Yeah.
there. Right. Let's see, as the facilitator, I heard some common themes around time, around quality of questions, around different entry points for based on different students' kind of needs. Also that balance of what is meaty enough to allow for time and what do you let go of, not perhaps, you know, or sacrifice in some cases because of the amount of time that it takes. And then also just that piece of, you know, thinking about preparing them for the conversation and allowing think time and then the talking time and then sort of the some sort of sharing. So figuring out how to kind of mesh those pieces together, and also at the same time honoring kids' voice within that. I also just noticed sort of from like a structure standpoint that there was some wait time within the conversation even, right? Like I just let you kind of wait and think. I heard definitely you using some conversation cues, and I heard you circling back to others' ideas, listening, and then going back to that piece. How did it feel to be a participant? Any reflections from your role in this?
I think initially it was like, well, whatever, but then once somebody started sharing, I felt like it became easier and easier, and you start thinking, oh yeah, and then things come to mind, which I'm assuming that's the point, because if we did it with kids more, it would become easier and easier.
Then would go off.
You know, and it would be more comfortable and for them as well.
Well, it was interesting, because like you said, you forgot your idea, because you were
I
trying to
remembered
listen.
it now, though.
Well, because you were trying to, okay, well, then go for it.
Yeah,
What was
I know.
your idea?
I was just thinking, like there's been times where it's going well, but then I am kind of like checking on, and they pick up on me reading my book, and then they lose interest in the conversation. That's a battle that I've been having. Is like, hey, I got you started, and we're going really fine, and now I'm just kind of looking over to see where we're going next, and I'm listening, but I'm not listening as carefully as should have been. So, and then oftentimes if I'm not listening very well, and then I know that I'm like, quiet, and okay, I'm done, and I'm just like, I have no idea what you said, I have nowhere to go with it, like, and maybe that's a place where I say, okay, well, you can tell me what sentence I just said, 'cause
Well, I think it's a struggle.
for you.
I think it's a struggle for adults and, you know, like we started thinking about our own stuff, you know, like you reminded me of something and now I'm gonna think of that. But kids are not quite as good at, I mean, it's a skill that they have shutting off, because that is a problem when we have discussions, they're so worried about what they're gonna say, they forget to listen to other, you know, the other kids. And they wanna say their piece about what but they, forgot the other 2/3 of the kids are
They're
sitting
so
there.
excited.
Right.
totally
Right.
heard from somebody.
Right.
we're all like,
Yeah,
that's what they
waiting.
just said.
Yeah, exactly. It's true.
Developmental issue.
Yeah, and it's part of learning, right? That balance between like the deeper thinking and the active listening. Right? There's a balance, and so that's what we're trying to promote is the listening along with the thinking piece, most definitely. And I just wanted to say a couple things, and then I'm going to kind of set you loose to, in some way, apply this. So if you want a new anchor chart, or if you want, this morning some of the K1 teachers were creating like sentence strips that they wanted to make sure they had up of some of these, or if there's in, some of these conversations about like the struggle with time or the struggle with other pieces, and I can help support you in that way too, but I want you to be able to apply this in some way in the last kind of like 20 or 25 minutes together. But just before we go there, I wanted to say one thing about, Lori, what you brought up regarding building on and how that can be a challenge. And that's sort of a common challenge that I hear across grade levels, is this idea that we're starting to enter into these conversations, and kids can even maybe share what their partner said, or they can say that they agree or disagree, but then there's nothing beyond that piece of it.
They know what the start is, but they don't apply the actual skill.
Right, exactly. So they've got an approximation, but they're not. So I was in a first grade classroom at Pennington or Peak Elementary a couple weeks ago, and the teacher was preparing her kids for the science talk, and she was noticing that they were not building onto each other, and they were doing something really cool, which was using building blocks, like actual physical building blocks. And if a student had something they were, like an idea they were building onto, they got to put the block onto this sort of tower structure. So it was a visual representation basically of what was happening as you build on or grow this conversation. And she did a very clear job of saying, if you're just repeating the same thing in a different way, or even sometimes if you're just like agreeing with the same exact fact, but it's just reworded, that's not building, that's just like laying the blocks down in order, right? So this difference, very visual difference between just like this row, exactly, versus
up.
That's
Interesting.
Yeah, and then we were debriefing this with a second grade teacher, and she was saying that she's also has taken this idea and was then talking about kids having to use evidence. So not only are you building, but then the next part of it was, did the speaker provide evidence with that? And she just had the kids doing like a visual sign language EQ. So the student would say something, she'd just look around, and the kids, if 3/4 or more of them were like, yes, there was evidence, then the student with the block had to look and be like, okay, I can add it. And if not, no, they didn't get to add their block because there wasn't the evidence provided. So anyways, I was thinking, I just thought that was really actually brilliant to watch, really cool to watch. And she had said that I was in there during a module lesson, but she'd said they started very much during morning meeting, which you guys were talking about earlier, and just building onto each other's ideas using kind of a meaty or fun question, that they wanted to talk about, and then had applied it to the science talk in the module. So that was, an idea that I wanted to share with you.
I think sometimes even though you say you're building on, they don't have a clear concept of that you're taking that idea and like you said, growing it, or
Yes,
they don't even know that it's
exactly
the visual. I like the visual.
Yeah, the visual, and you could probably think of another, maybe it's like a plant or something, you could probably do it in other ways, but the blocks were really cool to see. So I liked that a lot, and I thought it was a great example. Okay, so here was Justine's target for us, which is I can identify a place in an upcoming lesson where I can shift the cognitive load to my students. Okay, so just thinking about that. And then I added this, if you have time, I can plan my instruction for this shift. And all I mean by this is what I was saying, like, is there an anchor chart that would help? Or is there, do you want to think more thoroughly, like, do I have the blocks and how would that look? I mean, it can be, I don't mean anything like really lofty or crazy that you have to write or do. I just want to honor your time to be able to plan something to apply this conversation cues piece. Does that sound okay? All right. And Maureen, I know you don't have Nancy here, so it's kind of just you, but I would highly, if you guys want to collaborate and figure something out or not. Okay? Sound good?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
You could use writing something on a chart with a chart in the back, so it's pretty.
Yeah,
It's
totally.
really for me.
Feel free to.
Oh, I know.
Like a visual, because I mean, I used to do that for occasionally, like when we were doing what's it called? Thinking routines.
Yes.
Like I used to think, now I think, and I would just put a little reminder for me to ask them those questions. So maybe I just need to write them.
You're more than welcome to help yourself to chart paper, or if you want to go get, something, butcher paper or stamps or whatever.
You can have one. I'm thinking that I wanna do like kind of new anchor chart for them.
For them, but I think getting it for me too.
For myself, I mean, this would fit on a card. I mean, even and just, the little bigger note card. And either copy it, make it a hair bigger, so. And then just have them and just, they're a part of the, whatever lesson. But I know for me, I would need to look in the individual lesson to better know what to stick that in,
Well, sometimes, some of them you could just, like
I
you
feel
said,
like
there's
I
and it doesn't matter when.
Right.
Like it could be just
Totally,
building those dollars.
yes.
If I place
They're
them,
just-
right, I look and like, oh yeah.
Yeah,
let's use one of
now's
the-
a good
yeah.
time to
Oh,
use.
oh, look,
Uh-huh.
kind of like the cards they give us for math, that I stuffed somewhere and haven't picked out, or I need to have those cards.
yeah.
At hand if you want to use them.
Right.
But if I have it up on the wall, it's just a visual cue for me.
Totally, which is supportive of everyone in the room, right? Uh-huh. Yeah, that's exactly right.
So the hope is too that you're modeling, I would think, at least for us, modeling whole group first. And then, build that and then do that experiment where there you have your smaller groups and seeing, kind of make the rounds, are they taking off with it or is it just a question and then a dead end,
Yeah, and I would think kind of to your guys' point about the challenge of time, really that thoughtfulness, like pick one question that you want to try with and have them go deeper with, and have them go deeper see what happens if it's like 3 to 4 minutes, and it might just be testing, and it might not be what you hoped that time, because some little guy is repeating 6 times, or it won't necessarily look perfect every time, but yeah, just trying one lesson or 2, to really think about where's the deep thinking. Like Brianna said, what are the questions that are worth asking and that are going to promote that deeper thinking for kids?
Big star next to one. Put star
On every single one,
It's not really working out for me to narrow it down.
It's not really fair.
Like you said, just the right one.
I know. Thank you.
They probably go get my coffee. I'm starting you on one more, and I'm sure that that's on the video. Oh, really? Oh, there it shows that it's dead. So never mind. I'm not going back to my video.
And then I don't know if it's tricky or not, but just, because of our conversation with the protocols and TPTs, okay, that fine line to throw in the TPT or because you see some of these questions to go and trying to figure out, because you can't do it with every work time.
Exactly.
But if you can fit like one in, or you know what I mean? And so it's that fine line.
Or what is the TPT, and could there be a conversation as part of
As
a
part of
conversation
that.
cue as part of the TPT, right? So when you and your partner discuss, I want you to use this sentence or try to use this sentence stem today, or
I sometimes have to do like the back to back,
mm-hmm.
and then say what did your partner say, and that kind of thing. Whose partner said something similar? What did they say?
That's
That
a perfect
kind of
example.
It's where everybody, because it's taking less time,
Mhm.
because everybody had their little mini discussion,
Exactly.
and then we get to share out a little, but I don't have to wait for everybody.
Exactly. You don't have to hear from everyone.
Everybody.
And then who can build on to
Right.
what you're
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, just the build again.
Mhm.
With those, to kind of get it started like in a morning meeting type thing, now that you threw out the building block idea, it's hard not to just think about that, but the would you rather questions,
Mhm.
you're gonna have.
Oh,
kids
you're
on
talking
both
about my graph
sides.
choices?
Mhm.
You're talking about my graph choices or the fact?
No, your facts that you put up. I originally was talking about your facts,
Okay.
but now I'm just thinking of that morning time and how would those would you rather questions be a good opportunity to kind of
Practice.
Definitely.
conversations,
Mhm.
because you're gonna have kids on either side,
Mhm.
which could promote, what?
Totally.
With.
Exactly.
Right.
Because it helps to have a little dissonance sometimes.
It does. Exactly.
Yeah.
If they all agree with the first kid, it's pretty much
Right. It doesn't
Yeah.
lead to a very rich
Yeah.
conversation, does
Right.
it? Yeah.
It becomes that dead end.
Mhm. Yes.
which is why that I think that it worked really well to start with this whole kind of, thing that we did last week with the assessment, was because kids had definite opinions about whether they would recommend or not recommend Peter Pan.
Mhm.
And a variety of reasons why they thought that.
Why?
So there was a lot of opinion in the room,
Yes.
and both ways, and so that it allowed for, more
Yeah,
interesting
a
discussion.
meaty,
We all liked the book, it was
discussion.
great.
Right, that's not,
What's
you're
what's
right.
great about the book, oh, this and this, and like,
Mhm.
there's only so much you can get if there's not a little bit of an element
Dissonance, you're
of
true. Mhm.
helps.
Right,
Too, you don't want an argument,
right,
but,
yeah, but not necessarily a clear, consensus of idea.
You need a double head.
Yeah,
You do a
that's
little,
right.
you do a little
You
bit,
really
just,
do.
I mean, it makes it better.
Mhm.
Let me go see if I can find some, not all of my sentence strips are, like bright colors like that.
Mhm.
I like them to maybe be back, so they
Yeah.
catch my eye,
But not, okay.
like be the teacher things, no.
Right.
This one, because we're gonna watch Warren's presentation. And just to get that.
Well, our
conversation,
tack board is
what
in
they tell
here.
us about presentation. Good conversation here,
I gotta,
but it's a short one. About presentation.
I think she might have some colored stuff.
Quality would be your question.
So I'm thinking right now, try that. Want to do it, definitely, I'll just do that first one in the whole group.
I'm like thinking I'm gonna give them like something. Maybe I give them a story. Some kind of visual, like even just for throughout the day, because as I'm thinking, I mean, I try to call on everybody at least once, but like sometimes like the kids that I have to call on or they won't, I just want some kind of like incentive. They start the day out with a tab or a house specific. Oh, if I still see your popsicles, so be ready. Like, I don't know, just to create that equitable. Always I'm like, okay, I guess it's just me and Izzy and Leaf in here today, you know?
Do you want to think that they were making that paper thing? That one of the stiction on, they were. I have a can. I have a can.
Sorry, I can't think.
Help yourself. You don't need to be ready.
Listen up, here are your afternoon announcements. First off, let's make a big shout out to all our Bob performers. It sounds like it was another success, the way to go, Bob. Big shout out to Mrs. Casada, another success. Hope you guys make it back tonight for the performance. Teachers, today is a day 3 social bus duty. We have Mrs. Trujillo, Mrs. Bradley, Mrs. Otero, and Mrs. Hoy for bus duty. You are in robotics. You will meet after school today. Please check in with Mr. McGuire. If you are in robotics and normally go to ACC, please check in with ACC first and then go see Mr. McGuire. Teachers, send down your messengers and have a good night.
Until Kelly learning. Well, hopefully the kid will remember. Well, no, yeah,
Well, but our kids aren't,
Oh, your kids are in,
they're usually in specials, so.
oh, so they're not usually, you guys normally pick it up for
We
your dad?
usually pick them up, so.
Oh.
But they'll call in there if there's a message. Say, hey, I need your messenger.
Brianna, I liked your idea about having
some way of knowing like who's entered into conversation. Were you thinking across the day?
Yeah,
Mm-hmm. I know.
because I feel like there's so many opportunities throughout the
Mhm.
day for them
Totally.
to get into it, or at least to develop that voice.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
And
so
I
that
think
they're-
a visual sometimes is, you know, an interesting piece, even if it is like a stick or a token on their, I mean, I don't know, but on their table and just like, okay, thanks, you know, and it just goes, it's sort of a visual representation of like, you've added to conversation or to the, you could have it, you know, like you're adding to our learning or thinking for adding to our learning or thinking for today,
Yeah.
right? You
Yeah.
know?
And like really something for them to take like initiative
Mm-hmm.
to notice it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What time do you have bus? Is it 3:30 or 3:35? Okay. I'm gonna give you guys a couple more minutes. I mean, you can stay in here and work as long as you want, but I also wanna be cognizant, so.
Well, she has bus duty.
Yeah, what do you have, Jean?
She has
Well,
Ella duty.
I have Ella duty. So when she has bus duty, I get to go get Ella from preschool.
Fun.
Which is her little dark daughter, so.
Yeah.
That sounds like a really fun duty, actually.
Yeah.
Cute.
Getting some training. One of these days.
Mhm.
I think just the last 2 times that we've been together
Mhm.
is just, I mean, I appreciate just kind of the awareness more. I mean, we know all these things are in here, but I think so many times we're so overwhelmed with everything. So to target like the protocols and TPTs was really valuable because then I ended up, which was good, and I want to continue. I'll probably just maybe write it in my math book
Mhm.
because I knew I was being observed. I had several lessons prepared, and I purposefully did a TPT within the math. as it
Good job,
says.
Jamie, yay.
And
Extra points.
Just
Yes,
just the-
exactly, you
just
got
the
bonus
awareness,
points.
just the awareness. And then the same with this. It's just that awareness, like, I don't know, it just felt different the last
Oh,
2 times we met.
good.
Like,
Okay.
wow, this is really valuable.
Oh, I'm glad to
Helpful.
hear that. Good, okay.
So,
That's really good feedback
Yeah.
for us to know,
Yeah.
definitely, when we're thinking about like.
Cause I think you get in the trenches and you just forget, you just wanna get through it.
Totally,
And so you kind of shove those things aside. And
definitely.
so,
Too much to attend to
Just
something
different
all
ways to
at
bring it.
once, right?
Yeah,
Like
so-
all these, yeah.
and we're probably ready to receive it. It's just like
Actually, I
anything.
think too.
when you're overwhelmed, you're not
Totally.
ready. And different
Mhm.
times you're ready to receive different things.
Yes,
And
exactly, and it's
so-
much better timing, but I'm
Yeah.
glad to hear that, because, you know, it can be overwhelming too, so.
I just shared something last night on my Facebook. That was about never underestimating the power of planting a seed for a message that somebody's not quite ready to hear.
That's a good one. Mhm. Yeah, that's good to know though. That's good feedback for me to know about timing and because this, it looks a little different the way we've done some of this than how we've done it with other schools, and it's really good for me to have the opportunity to reflect and hear from you guys that like, okay, this has been helpful.
I feel, I mean, people feel differently, of course, but I feel like you kind of got to muddle through, and we're more than halfway into module 3.
Mm-hmm.
Getting closer and closer, and just ready to
Yeah.
receive.
What's next. Well, and to hear you guys talking about the TPTs and the protocols, also knowing that like Justine and Holly are continuing to kind of support that, right? But to hear you say like, oh, I'm starting to notice this in other places or apply it in different places or like that's really
think
promising.
The biggest awareness for us when we had that was we felt kind of like we really needed to read through all of those protocols to see what would fit,
be the right fit,
you know, in different places. And that's really true. Just gotta take, I mean, we've just kind of scratched the surface, I feel. Like with some of those that we use more often. And so that's kind of what my next goal is to really kind of read through the different ones and figure out, oh, this really applies here.
Yeah, when is the right time? Totally. Yes.
And to know what it is.
Right. And then to
Even
be
know what it
prepared to do it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Completely. And then I was talking to fifth grade because they had tried they tried four corners. Have you guys heard of that? I mean, they tried fishbowl, went really well. Tried four corners, apparently did not go very well. But that's also really good learning, right?
Yes.
Like, what did we learn from that, and what can we tweak or adjust based on? And Joan came in and she like immediately was very reflective. Like, I know I didn't do these things quite right. So, but if you never try them, you don't know that piece, right? And then the opportunity to reflect with each other too.
Yeah.
So, yay! I'm proud of you guys. To hear what your Lori's with. This is great. Are you taking that back with you?
Yeah, I'm gonna cut it in 3 sections and I'm gonna stick
smart.
them in little places around the top of the room.
Perfect.
And then I'll make them a Kager chart too, but I want one for me, just to remind,
That's
these are the
great.
questions that I think, I mean, I asked some of those other ones already.
Yeah.
You know, because there's been a while, you know.
Right, but
things
that are
we've-
more.
Well, even, yeah, so, but so more of these, like, how did this discussion add to your understanding?
Yeah.
Like, you know, some of those ones that
Mhm.
I wouldn't think of on my own,
Yeah.
but I could easily add to the end of the closing. you know,
Yes,
like,
definitely.
that's a
Your
closing,
debrief
you
for
know,
your
yeah,
closing,
exactly.
totally.
That I could just read it, and then, cause that was one of the things that they had to add on, it was on the checklist. Like it was, how did they add to the discussion, in the light of the discussion or something? So
Mhm.
like, they didn't just spew out what they wanted to spew, but they like, oh, you made me think of this, but that's that's where we obviously want to go, but a lot of them are not ready for it yet. It's like, oh, well, now I see that, and maybe, which is really, you know, so if I ask this question more, maybe I can get more of that.
To
Like, well, I
that.
heard you, and now that makes me think,
Mhm.
kind of thing.
Totally, and that's when we talk about like that higher cognitive demand, right? That's
Right.
very metacognitive.
Right, and it may not, I mean, but if I could throw it in occasionally,
Yes, yes.
then that would be.
They're getting
yeah.
practice with
Yeah.
that, right? So
So
that then I like your cutting again, right?
Yeah, well, like, this is too big for one place.
For
But if
one
I
thing.
put it along a couple of my corners in my room where it catches my eye and I go, oh yeah, do you agree or disagree with your classmate? See, means classmate. means
Nice.
And who can explain why your
Mhm.
classmate had
Have
that
that
response? So just pick the ones that they're a lot different than maybe things that,
Yeah.
I mean, I do, you know, what makes you think so. But I
Yeah.
figure, like, okay, I need to know.
Totally, that's good. Those ones that you're just gonna go to. Awesome. All right, and you guys, are you feeling good? You've been looking through your lessons.
Yeah.
Yeah? All right. Gonna try something? What are you gonna try?
Well, I think what I wanna try is, I wanna look closer at the sentence stems here, but, my kids have to look at a video of the oral presentation.
Yes.
And it says what made Thomas's oral presentation high quality. And that might be a good simple place to get somebody started, and then somebody else, I don't know.
Build on, yeah.
So let's see.
Okay. And try it
Yeah,
and see.
and the other one is, I mean, I don't know, I know I don't have time for two, but always at the end, like you were saying,
Mhm.
what kind of feedback are we giving somebody? crowd or the
Yeah.
opposite feeling too.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a good idea. No.
They do.
Then what are you thinking?
I don't know, I'm feeling like just what I've read for tomorrow's lesson, there's not a lot of space for the right questions.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I tried to be, giving feedback, giving evaluations of something, so. There's a think, pair, share question, how does this work, share your progress towards this learning target? So you're gonna like take those answers, and it says it,
Mm-hmm.
cute.
Yeah, good, okay.
You can add on to what your classmates said. So I'm just feeling like I do these things a lot, but the kids aren't saying that.
Uh-huh.
Like, so, like yesterday, for instance, we're trying to match captions to the picture.
Mhm.
They were deciding which caption would be best. And so I had called them one person and they shared their idea. And then I started, well, you can tell me why. So we're good on that.
Good, okay.
My classroom gets that.
That's
But I would like to see them connected to
Right.
the
to ask the
ownership.
questions.
Mhm. So maybe it's time to start like
Yeah.
modeling a
And it's
little.
gonna take practice. I mean, it's not gonna be an automatic thing.
Right.
Because they're not comfortable with it or used to, they're used to an adult always
Totally.
feeding it and,
Mhm.
you know, so it's.
It is, it's definitely a shift, right?
Right.
That we're
It
for
is.
sure shifting that, yes, so, yeah. Thanks, you guys, you're
Thank you.
lovely to work with,
Thank you.
and do something to take care of yourselves, too. It's a really tiring time at this point. Have fun, you guys are going to the performance tonight?
Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Oh.
You get
You get her daughter, I'll find my
I know,
son.
you
to
find your
relax.
son, and
Gotta go
Brianna heads out to
relax.
bus duty.
Yep.